Welcome to the debate. Today we are putting our finger on a pulse that I think every single person listening can probably feel beating in their own lives. We're looking at the trade-off that really defines the modern human experience. It's the tension that keeps us up at night. It dictates how we spend the vast majority of our waking hours. And, it frames almost every major life decision we make. We're talking about the binary of money versus freedom.
Yeah, it is the ultimate this or that question. And honestly, it's the question that usually ruins a perfectly good dinner party. Because when you bring this up, security versus, autonomy, everyone has the same knee-jerk reaction. They want to reject the premise entirely. They say, I want both.
Right, they always want the freedom to make money. That's the standard answer.
Exactly. We all want the loophole. We all want to believe we can have the corner office salary with the schedule of a freelance surfer. But for the sake of this discussion and, for the sake of reality, we are going to strip away that idealism. We have to acknowledge that in the real world, these two values are often in a zero-sum conflict. You usually have to pay for one with the currency of the other.
That is the harsh reality. It isn't just a preference. It's a prioritization of values. And I want to start by being very clear about where I stand on this. I think there is a dangerous trend, especially lately, to vilify the pursuit of financial security as something soulless or corporate or selling out. But my position is that money is the foundational element of agency. There is an analogy in the material we are reviewing today that I find just absolutely impossible to refute, and it sets the stage for everything else. Money is like oxygen.
It's a strong metaphor.
It is the only metaphor that works. Think about how you interact with air. When you have enough oxygen, when you are breathing normally, you don't think about it. You don't walk around grateful for every single breath. You think about your hobbies, your relationships, your art, your family. But the second the oxygen is cut off, it is the only thing you can think about. You cannot paint a masterpiece if you were suffocating. You cannot enjoy autonomy if you were gasping for air.
I understand that the biological imperative you were drawing there, it makes sense on a survival level, it does. But I look at the same landscape and, I see a different tragedy. If we treat money as the prerequisite for life, we end up delaying living indefinitely. We build what the source material describes as the golden cage. My argument is that freedom is the intrinsic good. It's the destination. Money is just a tool, and honestly, a lot of the time, a clumsy one. If you prioritize the tool over the destination, you end up with a life where you have the means to live, but absolutely no autonomy to actually do the living.
That sounds romantic, and I know it appeals to the artist in all of us. It appeals to that part of us that wants to run away to the woods. But I'm looking at the mechanical reality of existence. Without the stability that money provides, freedom, it's an illusion. As the text suggests, and I love this line because it just cuts so deep, freedom without money is often just unemployment with better branding.
That is a cynical take, though I admit's catchy. But I'll counter it with this. Money without freedom is just stress with better packaging.
Fair enough. Let's dig into that packaging, though, because I think people undervalue it. I want to challenge this idea that the pursuit of money is somehow a betrayal of the self. We see this narrative everywhere, the hustle culture backlash, the starving artist trope. The idea is that throwing off the shackles of a 9-to-5 makes you free. But the source material makes a brutal, necessary point that we cannot ignore. Landlords do not accept passion as rent.
That is objectively true.
They are notoriously sticklers for cash.
They are. And this brings us to the physiology of poverty. We can sit here and talk philosophy, but consider the physical response a human body has to financial instability. The material highlights the sheer panic induced when a paycheck is late by even 24 hours. That isn't just inconvenience, that is terror. If you are hyperventilating because a direct deposit hasn't cleared, you are not free. I don't care how much autonomy you have over your Tuesday afternoon. If you are terrified of the rent being due, you are in a cage.
I accept that acute financial distress is a form of imprisonment. I'm not arguing for poverty. However, I think you're conflating survival with living. You mentioned the romanticization of freedom, but let's look at the romanticization of the grind. The text notes that people often convince themselves they're building character through financial struggle. But let's be honest, and the source is quite candid here, Struggle often builds trauma, not character.
Which is exactly why I advocate for money, to avoid that trauma. I want to buy my way out of the trauma-building exercises.
But at what cost? This is where I disagree with the money-first approach. The material introduces a critical concept, the timeline of happiness. Money promises freedom later. Work hard now, save up, suffer through the entry-level years, retire at 65, and then you will be free. Whereas freedom offers happiness now. And this is the crux of the deception. Later is often a scam word that adults use to justify misery in the present. We sacrifice our actual, tangible lives, our youth, our energy, for a future that is never guaranteed.
I see the appeal of living in the now. It's very seductive to say, I'll worry about tomorrow, tomorrow. But I would frame it differently. You call later a scam, I call it risk management. If you prioritize immediate freedom, say quitting your job to backpack through Europe without a safety net, you are essentially borrowing happiness from your future self, and the interest rate on that loan, it's catastrophic.
Oris, you are ensuring you actually have some happiness before you die. Look at the alternative described in our source material, the rich but stuck scenario. This is the person who did everything right by your metrics. They have the high salary, the title, the oxygen, but they are trapped in meetings they hate for 10 hours a day. That is a form of spiritual poverty. You're in a sealed room with plenty of air, but you can't move your limbs. That is the definition of the golden cage.
I think we're talking past each other a little because we are working with a static definition of freedom. And one of the key insights from the text is that the definition of freedom, it's not fixed. It evolves as we age. And understanding that evolution is key to my argument.
How so?
Well, think about it. When you are 18 or 20, what does freedom look like? It looks like rebellion. It's skipping class, staying out until sunrise, breaking rules. It is the absence of restriction. It's chaotic. But the text argues that by 28 or 38, the definition shifts entirely. Freedom becomes selective participation.
Selective participation. Okay, let's unpack that because it sounds a bit, corporate.
It's the most precise definition of modern liberty I have come across. It is the ability to cancel plans without guilt. It's the ability to say no to a project, a client, or a social obligation that drains you. But here is the catch, and this is why I argue money is the root of this freedom. You can only practice selective participation if you have the financial standing to absorb the social or professional cost of that no. If you are broke, you have to say yes to every shift. You have to say yes to the toxic client. Therefore, money buys the right to say no.
I'm sorry, but I have to push back on that. You are redefining freedom as purchasing power. You're essentially saying, I am free because I can afford to buy my way out of inconvenience. That isn't liberty. That's just leverage.
Is there a functional difference in the modern world? I mean, if I can remove the things I dislike from my life because I can afford to, am I not free?
Absolutely, there is a difference. Because selective participation implies you are still participating in the system that controls you. You just have a VIP pass. Real freedom is existing outside that system. The source material brings up this concept of fake freedoms that high earners delude themselves with.
Like what?
Okay, take the work-from-home revolution. People think, I have freedom. I am in my living room, I'm wearing sweatpants, but they never log off. The Slack notification sounds at 8 p.m. and they answer. They are tethered by an invisible leash. Or take the entrepreneur, the be your own boss stream. The text points out the supreme irony here. You quit having one boss only to realize that every single client is now your boss. You have traded one master for 20. You have money, sure, but your autonomy has actually decreased. You're constantly checking your email. That isn't freedom. That is servitude with better overheads.
I see your point about the trap of the entrepreneur, and I agree the boundaries are hard. But let's look at the flip side of your real freedom. You talk about existing outside the system. The text describes this state, freedom without money. And as I mentioned before, it feels like unemployment with better branding.
It's a stinging critique, I admit.
It's accurate. If you have freedom but you are eating instant noodles every day because you can't afford protein, are you free Or are you just a prisoner of your own biology? The anxiety of poverty, the eating instant noodles phase, it invalidates the concept of freedom. You are not free to explore the world. You are tethered to the cheapest possible existence. You are worried about the price of bus fare. That mental load is heavier than any board meeting.
But there is a massive cognitive dissonance here that the source identifies, and I think we need to analyze it. We see people romanticizing this noodle freedom on Instagram, van life, backpacking, tiny homes. We watch these videos from our office chairs with envy. Why? While secretly clinging to our stable salaries. Why do we do that if money is so great?
Because we like the fantasy. We like the idea of running away more than the reality of sleeping in a van.
I think it's deeper. I think deep down we know the golden cage is comfortable. But that doesn't make it right. It just makes us cowardly. We are trading the adventure of life for a predictable heartbeat. We are choosing anesthesia over experience.
I don't think it is cowardice. I think it is an admission that the packaging matters. The source makes a humorous but profound observation. People say they would quit their jobs for freedom, but deep down they value the packaging that money gives to their stress. I mean, being stressed in a Lexus is fundamentally different from being stressed on a crowded bus with broken AC.
And that is where I fundamentally disagree. Stress is stress. Cortisol does not care about the upholstery. Your arteries don't know you're in a luxury car. They just know you're stressed.
I'm not convinced by that. The environment mitigates the suffering. If I am going to have an existential crisis, I would much rather have it in a comfortable home with a stocked fridge than in a cold apartment.
Let's pivot back to the timeline argument, because this is where the money-first argument really falls apart for me. We talked about later being a scam. The source argues that prioritizing money relies on a model of delayed gratification that is, well, it's increasingly broken.
Broken how?
We are told to work hard, save, endure the meetings we hate, and then at some undefined point in the future, we will be free. But the text explicitly challenges this. It says, later is a scam word adults use.
It is a cynical take.
Is it? By the time later arrives, you might be too old to climb the mountain. You might be too tired to travel. Or tragically, you might be sick. The person who chooses freedom, even with the instant noodles, is living their life in the present tense. They are not waiting for permission to exist. They are grabbing the narrative now.
But are they happy? Or are they just pretending that struggle is a virtue? The source material cuts through this pretense beautifully. It says people are tired of pretending struggle builds character. And then it drops this hammer. Therapy is cheaper than freedom.
That line got a laugh in the source context, but it is actually quite dark.
It is practical. If the choice is between the chaotic, unmoored anxiety of freedom and the stable, managed stress of a high-income career where I can afford therapy to deal with that stress, the rational choice is money. Financial stability is the most direct path to mental well-being. You can pay someone to help you process the stress of the job. You cannot pay someone to fix the fact that you have no retirement savings and your teeth hurt but you can't afford a dentist.
That is a compelling argument for safety. I will give you that. It appeals to our desire for security. But have you considered the 2 a.m. test?
The 2 a.m. test?
The source asks a crucial question. What happens at 2 a.m. when the overthinking hits? When the distractions of the day are gone, the Netflix is off, and you are just staring at the ceiling fan.
Okay.
If you have chosen money over freedom and you are lying there in your high thread count sheets, dreading the alarm clock, feeling your life slip away one spreadsheet at a time, is the money comforting you then? That is a specific kind of hollowness. It is the realization that you are selling your time, your only non-renewable resource, for digits in a bank account. You can't buy that time back.
And I would ask the reverse. If you're waking up at 2 a.m. in a hostel, wondering how you're going to pay for a flight home, or terrified because you found a lump and you have no health insurance, is the freedom comforting you then?
A fair counter.
The fear in my scenario is existential. Am I wasting my life? The fear in your scenario is primal. Will I survive? I would rather wrestle with existential dread than primal fear. I can manage existential dread. I can take a vacation. I can buy a book. I cannot manage the inability to survive. Primal fear paralyzes you. Existential dread just makes you thoughtful.
I suppose that depends on your tolerance for regret versus your tolerance for risk. The person with money fears a lack of meaning. The person with freedom fears a lack of security. But I would argue that a lack of control over one's time is a deeper form of misery.
Let's try to ground this in a specific metric from the material, because I think it perfectly encapsulates my position on why money is freedom. The ordering food metric.
Ah, yes. The right side of the menu.
Exactly. The text argues that true freedom is ordering food without checking prices. You go to a restaurant, you look at the menu, and you choose what you want based solely on desire. I want the steak, without your eyes darting to the right column to check if it fits the budget. That moment, that micro-interaction is pure liberty, and it is entirely provided by money.
I accept the example, but I interpret it completely differently.
How so? It seems pretty clear. Money removes the constraint.
You are confusing the tool with the outcome. The goal in that scenario isn't the spending of the money. The goal is the absence of calculation. The goal is mental quiet. You want to eat without doing math in your head.
Agreed.
You are arguing that money is the only way to achieve that silence. But the dissenter, the pro-freedom side, would argue that if you simply lower your baseline needs, or if you detach your happiness from expensive restaurant food, you also achieve that silence. The person who is content with simple food and has total control over their day is not calculating either. They aren't worried about the price of the steak because they don't need the steak to feel good.
That feels like a bit of a reach. Just want less is a difficult prescription for a modern society. It sounds like giving up.
Perhaps. But consider the exchange rate hypothetical mentioned in the source. This is the flip side of your menu metric. You have the person who is free enough to travel. They are in Paris. They've done it. They're living the dream. But they are mentally trapped because they're constantly calculating exchange rates. Is this coffee $4 or $5? Is the bus cheaper than the metro?
Yes, that is exactly what I'm talking about.
They are physically in front of the Eiffel Tower, but mentally they are in a ledger. They aren't seeing the tower. They are seeing the conversion rate.
Exactly. That is not freedom. That is just being an accountant in a scenic location. That proves my point. Without the money to ignore the math, the location doesn't matter. You've just exported your poverty to France.
But compare that to the person stuck at home with plenty of money who never has to calculate the price of dinner, but also never sees Paris. Who is freer, the one struggling in the world or the one comfortable in the cage?
The one in the cage can book a first-class ticket to Paris next month and enjoy it without the anxiety. They can see the tower and drink the coffee without checking the price.
If their boss lets them take the time off. If they aren't answering emails during the flight. If a merger doesn't cancel their vacation days. And that is the if that rules their life. They are waiting for permission.
And the other person can only go if they survive the lack of funds. It seems we are circling the same drain here.
We are. And I think that brings us to the realization that the source material points toward. The binary is unfair because, as the text says, everyone wants both. But since both is banned in this thought experiment, we have to look at what lies beneath the choice.
I agree. As we wrap up, I want to summarize my perspective in light of this discussion. The real dream, as admitted by the participants in the source discussion, isn't just freedom in the abstract. It's having enough money to protect your freedom.
A buffer zone.
Precisely. The tension isn't really money versus freedom. It is fear versus control. Money provides the control necessary to quiet the fear. It allows you to build a fortress around your life so that when you do decide to participate, it is on your terms. Without money, you are always reacting to the world. With money, the world reacts to you.
That is a strong closing argument. However, I still maintain that the ultimate value is autonomy in the now. Money is a buffer, yes, but it is a buffer that often becomes a wall. You build the fortress to protect yourself, and then you realize you cannot leave the fortress. You become a guard of your own hoard, watching the world through a slit in the stone.
A risk I am willing to take for safety.
My summary would be this. The correct answer to this debate is fluid. The source material wisely notes that what you believe at 20 when freedom is staying out late, might be alive by 30. Our values change, but if you sacrifice your prime years to the scam of later, you risk arriving at the destination only to find you have forgotten how to be free. You have forgotten how to breathe the air you spent 40 years buying.
That is a haunting thought.
It is. The text concludes that most of us are navigating a spectrum between the golden cage and unemployment with better branding. We are all hypocrites to some degree. We claim to love wild freedom, but we sleep better with a savings account.
And we claim to love the hustle, but we dream of the day we can stop.
Exactly. So perhaps the final question for our listeners isn't which side they agree with intellectually, but the one posed by the source. At 2 a.m., when the overthinking hits, is your crisis about a lack of funds or a lack of life?
A question we will leave you to answer for yourselves. Thank you for listening to The Debate.
Until next time.